We want the opportunity for the people of Scotland to have their voices heard, to make their choice over their futures. And, Mr. Speaker, we want the opportunity to stop this Prime Minister from ripping us out of the European Union against our will. Can I say to the honourable gentleman...
Order! The right honourable gentleman shouldn't have to do so. You are a most statuesque figure, Mr. Kaczynski, and therefore you're very readily visible and sometimes audible. I very gently say to you, because you're generally a very good-natured fellow, that it is quite inappropriate when standing at the bar of the House also to be bellowing. Stand and look impressive rather than yell, man. That would be my advice. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We want the opportunity to stop this Prime Minister from ripping us out of the European Union against our will. Members can jeer all they want, but this Prime Minister has lost Scotland.
Hear, hear.
The Prime Minister has lost the support of the old Scottish Tory leader.
Yeah.
Writing tonight in the Evening Standard, Ruth Davidson has landed a blow on the Prime Minister. Things are really that bad for the Prime Minister and for this shambolic failing Tory government. Mr. Speaker, the matter is simple. We want an election, but we don't want it on the Prime Minister's terms. This is a Prime Minister obsessed with running down the clock, a Prime Minister who cannot be trusted, a Prime Minister who is seeking to trap Parliament tonight so he can drive us off the cliff edge. Well, Mr. Speaker, we are not falling for it.
Hear, hear.
The Prime Minister thinks he can treat Parliament however he wants. He thinks he can ignore the people of Scotland, to treat our Scottish Parliament, our government and our citizens as second-class citizens. Mr. Speaker, Scotland will not be ignored. Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in the European Union. Scotland voted overwhelmingly for the SNP to oppose the Tory government here in Westminster. And Scotland will have the chance to vote to say that this Prime Minister, this government, does not represent the people of Scotland and our wishes. Mr. Speaker, since the referendum, we have been treated with contempt, shouted down, our voices silent, our interests sidelined. Well, Mr. Speaker, let me put the Prime Minister on notice. The election is coming. I give way.
I thank the right honourable friend for giving way, but the fact he fails to tell the House, and I've said it before, in 2016, there was more people in Scotland voted to leave the European Union than voted for the SNP in the 2017 election.
Well, you can ask for more, and I can see the Prime Minister laughing. But let me tell you what happened in 2016. We had election to the Scottish Parliament, and the SNP won its third election on the trot. And we did that with a manifesto commitment that if there was a material change in circumstances, then the Scottish people had a right to have a referendum for their future. So my message to the honourable member from Ayr, to the Prime Minister, respect the will of the people of Scotland. Mr. Speaker, once the threat of a no-deal Brexit is removed from the table, the SNP will act. And we urge others to act, to bring down the Tories, oust this Prime Minister and let the people have their say. Once we're safe in the knowledge that we're not leaving the European Union on Halloween, the days of this government will be over. When we return in October, we expect the opposition to work together to bring this government to an end. We've had enough of this dictatorship, enough of the deceit, the fake news, the sham fighting, the games and the stunts. We've had enough. So I say to members, I say to people at home, across these islands who are feeling lost, forgotten, anxious and worried about the future, our time is coming. We will keep fighting for you. Where we can, we will work in the interests of the people across Scotland and the UK to protect our economy from the Brexit catastrophe. And we will create the circumstances, find a way to strip this government of power, end the democratic... Can I say to the honourable gentleman, if you wish to speak in the debate, you might try and attract the eye of the Speaker. Shouting out like this, shutting down Scottish voices is not the way to go. Mr. Speaker, end the democratic deficit and give the people back control. An election is coming, and the SNP will assure that post the suspension period, when no deal is off the table, that the people of Scotland will have the opportunity to choose their future, to choose to be citizens who want to be part of Europe, to choose to live in a country that is outward-looking and welcoming, to choose to live in an independent Scotland focused on opportunity and fairness, free of broken Brexit Britain. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is warned. His days in office are numbered.
5,000. Sir Alan Duncan.
Mr. Speaker, I had no intention a few moments ago of speaking in this debate, but I would just like to say three things which I hope the House will take on board. The first is to appreciate the constitutional catastrophic significance of the Fixed-Term Parliaments Act. I tried in a 10-minute rule bill to repeal it in 2015, and we all understand why it came into being. It was to be the glue in the coalition government after the election of 2010. But it should have had a sunset clause. And the effect of this act is now to trammel this government and our Prime Minister in a very, very Kafkaesque trap, that he's finding it very difficult to govern, but is unable to call a general election. And I very much hope that the first act, probably of the next Parliament, will be to abolish the Fixed-Term Parliaments Act. The second point is this. It's just to issue a word of caution about the danger that comes with mixing up the difficult and complicated, unresolved issue of Brexit with a potential general election. A general election is, by its very nature, general. We are all up for grabs. And all policies in a manifesto are also there for debate. But this has been, Brexit, the most divisive, poisonous, difficult issue of our life. And if we go into a general election with an unresolved Brexit, there is no way that a clear answer on Brexit can be said to emerge from that process. And quite possibly, because of the nature of Brexit and the way that it is pushing our entire post-Victorian party system into near collapse, and we may have four-way competitions in almost every constituency, we may find that it doesn't actually resolve the problem of government either. So I would ask this House to appreciate that we are in a dreadful bind, and that the binary politics of largely Labour and Conservative may be behind us, if not forever, at least for a very, very long time. And the third point is this. I've told my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, that despite some of our past differences, although we work together very closely in the Foreign Office, I will stick by the government. But I very much regret, and it's very painful, that 21 of the most decent members of Parliament, who I very much regard as kindred spirits, have lost the whip. And I would just ask the House to sort of imagine the scene. A slightly grotty Victorian building that passes as the headquarters of the local Conservative Association. Portraits on the wall of Disraeli, Churchill, Thatcher. Then perhaps a couple of blank spaces. And the chairman is there and the phone rings. And someone says, look, I'm a bloke from number 10, you've never heard of me, but I'm afraid your MP has been sacked. You must strike him off all the records, or her. You cannot talk to them now, and we're going to re-select someone straight away. The only response a self-respecting chair can give is, can I thank you very much for your call, young man. Now bugger off. So we must appreciate that still the constituency is an essential unit of our democracy. It is the building block which makes this House what it is. And there may, of course, be party rules, but we should be very careful about letting party rules be superseded by the control at the centre. So I very much hope that although many of the 21 will be standing down and it matters less to them, one second, it is not the case for some whose career should rightfully be ahead of them. So I very much hope that my right honourable friend and our party system, through our chairman, can appreciate that a route should be found back for those who wish to stand again, and that all immediate selections for an alternative candidate should be suspended so that it can be known that they have a chance. So, no, I'm not going to give way to anybody. So, Mr. Speaker, no. So, Mr. Speaker, those are the 3 points that I simply want to make. And I hope that as this House goes through what is a very difficult and painful process as we approach the election, that when it is recomposed after that election, we can appreciate the importance of legislation in this House and pay it proper attention so that members of Parliament can see that making law is probably their most important role as members of Parliament, and that political combat should take a second place. And if we do that, we then, I hope, will never again have the folly of the Fixed-Term Parliament Act.
Very well. Point of order, Mr. Paul Scully.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I fear that my right honourable friend might have inadvertently misled the House in terms of the fact that actually every single member of this party that has lost the whip is still a member of the Conservative Party, unless they have chosen to cross the floor. And so the situation that he's described is not actually the case. And actually, I think it's important. So therefore, it's important to actually realise that the discussion that we're having is that we need to be in the place that we should be talking about. Well done.
I don't wish to be unkind to the honourable gentleman because I recognise that he feels that he's got a serious point, but it's not a matter for the chair, and the right honourable gentleman member for Rutland and Melton has, if I may say so, made a speech whose meaning is perfectly clear. So if the honourable gentleman wants to disagree with him, he can do so elsewhere, but it's not a matter that requires my adjudication. I was absolutely clear what the right honourable gentleman was saying, and I don't think the House feels misled, if I may very politely say so. Jay Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it is a delight to follow the Right Honourable Member for Rutland and Melton, who I think made a thoughtful contribution to this debate in what is an important time for Parliament, and may I say in some stark contrast to the beginning of this debate, which I'm afraid I do not believe was a very edifying spectacle for our constituents who are watching this and who are, many of them, worried about what is happening in our country right now. The braying, the bluster, Britain deserves better. I also want to commend the Right Honourable Member for Hastings and Rye for the brave decision that she took at the weekend. We are in exceptional times, and in the face of a Prime Minister who is prepared not only to shut out of his party more than 20 individuals who have given it great service, he is prepared to shut down Parliament, potentially flout the rule of law, and inflict on the British public the consequences of no deal as outlined in the Yellowhammer report. I think it is time that others in the Conservative Party also examine their consciences about what they can do and the role that they are playing in all of this. The Prime Minister, in his speech, goaded those of us on the opposition benches who disagree with his dash for an election, and he said it is because we are afraid that he will win. Well, I'd say to the Prime Minister, people in this country are afraid. They are afraid of a no-deal Brexit. They are afraid of a no-deal Brexit that his own government analysis, that he is trying to keep secret even in the face of this House voting for it to be published, says that there will be food shortages of fresh food and prices will rise, that there will be delays and disruption to fuel supplies in the southeast, and that there will be severe extended delays for medical supplies. So it is no wonder that people are afraid, and he should treat this matter with more seriousness.
Would she give way?
I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Would she agree with me that instead of the government spending £100 million of taxpayers' money on propaganda, they should disclose a Yellowhammer and spend £100 million promulgating that to educate the public about the horror that faces us if we have a no deal?
Well, it's very clear that the government should release that report, and they have been instructed to do so by this House. I want to scotch the myth that he is putting about that a no-deal Brexit is in some way an end to this whole Brexit issue. As indeed Leo Varadkar made clear today, that would be a case of being back to the negotiating table, that a no-deal Brexit is just the beginning of many further years of negotiations. If people really want an end to this Brexit mire, the way to do that is to stop Brexit. I'll give way.
The Guardian, of which I'm an avid reader, says that the Lib Dems are poised to back revoking of Article 50 entirely. Is that correct?
I mean, the honourable gentleman cannot be surprised that the Liberal Democrats are a party that wishes to stop Brexit. And in a general election where we will stand to secure a Liberal Democrat majority, such a Liberal Democrat majority government would indeed revoke Article 50. I do not think he should be surprised by that position. Perhaps he should pay more attention. But this government and this Prime Minister have no mandate for a no-deal Brexit that they are trying to force on the British people. It is clear also from the resignations of the right honourable members, both for Orpington and Hastings and Rye, that he has no plans for securing a Brexit deal. He is not entering into this in any spirit of seriousness, and I think that the speech by the honourable member for Stafford made this point exceptionally well. Because how does the Prime Minister seriously think that with the previous occupant of that role having tried to negotiate a deal over the course of 3 years, that he and he alone can achieve in 4 weeks what she failed to do, and he can fight a general election at the same time? What arrogance! If he were serious about getting a deal, he would be negotiating hard in Brussels, not running away from the responsibility of the job that he now holds, that he said he wanted for such a long time. Now, the Right Honourable Member for Rutland and Melton, I think, made the excellent point that a general election cannot be guaranteed to resolve this issue one way or the other. The best way to do this is to hold a people's vote on the Brexit deal. That is the best way to resolve this crisis. to give people that choice of no deal, or to give people the choice of the Brexit deal that has been negotiated, or to remain in the European Union. But I do not believe there is a majority for any specific type of Brexit in this country, and we could determine whether that were the case or not in a people's vote. The Liberal Democrats are crystal clear. We want to stop Brexit. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman for Cheltenham.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. The Honourable Lady says that she wants a second referendum, but the problem for the British people will be this. If the answer she gets is one that she doesn't agree with, the stated position of the Liberal Democrats is simply to ignore it. That's not democracy.
I think he might do well to pay rather more attention to his constituents in Cheltenham and what they would like to see happen. But can I say an answer to his point? Of course I want us, Liberal Democrats want us to stay in the European Union. Of course we want that to happen. And we want people to have the choice to choose that option in a people's vote. We have argued for...
Order. There were points of order earlier in our proceedings about conduct that was very intimidating for members and in some cases members' families. I know that there are inflamed passions, but I just ask members to consider this. The Honourable Lady is trying to deliver a speech and doing so with a customary eloquence and fluency. No, with a customary eloquence and fluency. She shouldn't be shouted down, and she won't be. Stop it. Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that others in the House would like the Liberal Democrats to be silenced, and that will not happen on my watch, because we are crystal clear on Brexit. We want to stop Brexit, and that's why thousands of people across the country are joining the Liberal Democrats, including MPs from both the Labour and the Conservative parties. Now, whether it's votes in this House or ministerial colleagues, the Prime Minister is making a habit of losing. And although I believe that a people's vote is the best route to resolve this, I say to the Prime Minister, he can have his general election as soon as he secures an extension. Because otherwise, we risk the scenario where there is a general election where we might crash out of the European Union without a deal, either during or in the immediate aftermath of such an election, and with Parliament not sitting at those crucial moments. It would be the height of irresponsibility to dissolve Parliament at that time. Any general election must be undertaken in a period of calm, with an orderly approach, not in a period of national crisis. The Prime Minister is playing at this. In his speech tonight, he made it sound like this was sport, like this was a game. This is not a student debating society. This is about the national interest, about being sure that we avoid the risk of a no-deal Brexit, and that's why we will vote down his motion tonight.
Andrew Selous.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In normal circumstances, parliamentary democracy serves our country well. But in the last 2 and a bit years, I have been ashamed of the behaviour of this Parliament. A Parliament in which academic analysis referred to by the House of Commons Library points out that 409 out of the 650 constituencies had Leave majorities, and that was on an 80% turnout, far higher than any turnout that we are elected on at a general election. So over the last 2 and a bit years, we have a Parliament that thinks it knows better than the public this Parliament explicitly gave the decision to. We have a Parliament that thinks it is acceptable to use representative democracy to defeat direct democracy. A direct democracy explicitly agreed and voted for by this Parliament. We have a Parliament that has totally failed to work across party lines to find an acceptable way forward. And we have a Parliament that is very good at saying no, but is bereft of ideas to come up with anything better. And we also have a Parliament where an increasing number of MPs were elected with often significant majorities for one party, who then declare for another without any agreement from their constituents. So if we value our democracy and everyone who took part in the referendum, we must honour the result and everyone who voted, all of whom were told that the result would be respected. And democracy requires that the losers accept the result. So we should honour the referendum by returning powers over our money, laws, borders and trade in a way that is orderly and supports jobs. And I want to see our negotiations turbocharged. We need a government with a mandate and a new Parliament that will actually vote for something for a change, a new Parliament that will work in the national interest for a good deal that respects the referendum result.
George Howarth.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman for South West Bedfordshire. And I find it a little strange that he criticises the House for not working on a cross-party basis. That is why we are here tonight. That is why so many of the parties in this House of Commons are going to oppose the government's motion. I think what he means is he wants cross-party working so long as the cross-parties work with him rather than between themselves. Mr. Speaker, in my time in this House, I've seen 7 Prime Ministers come and go. We are now on the 8th. I had enormous differences with many of them, but in every case up until now, I've always accepted that they acted in good faith and what they perceived to be the national interest. Before I go any further, Mr. Speaker, I should point out that what I'm about to say breaks 2 rules that I've set myself during this time in the House, my time in the House. The first one is to try to play the ball, or rather than the man or woman, and the second is never to take issue with the chair. I'm not about to break the second one, Mr. Speaker, but I will comment. On the role of the chair, Mr. Speaker, all of the speakers I've served under, I think that you're the 4th, have always upheld the rights and privileges of members of this House, which you have done as well. And they've always behaved to uphold the constitution of our country and the rules and so on of this House, and they've all done it in their own distinctive way. I want to pay tribute, Mr. Speaker, to the way you've conducted yourself. You have stood up for the rights of this House, and often in the face of criticism from sometimes, usually on the government benches, you show great courage in carrying out your responsibilities, and I pay tribute to you. The second rule, which I am about to break, brings me to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. He is, as everybody would agree, often entertaining. He does have, as I know from some experience with him, an enormous amount of stamina. But political leaders need to have 3 additional qualities. First, it's essential that they exercise good judgment. Secondly, they need to be trusted to follow a course of action that they genuinely believe is in the best interests of our country, even in circumstances when it might not be universally popular to do so. And thirdly, and I find this the most troubling part of the Prime Minister's speech tonight, they need to be absolutely clear that on no occasion would they contemplate breaking the law of the land. As sadly has been demonstrated in his short time as Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Gentleman has shown neither good judgment or any sense that he's willing to put what is in the best for our country ahead of his own personal ambition. Now, Mr. Speaker, in normal times, the logic of the case I've just made would be that I would support the motion before us today. But these are not normal times. The Prime Minister cannot be trusted to use the vacuum created by a general election to thwart the will of this House. If he's serious about coming up with a deal that will suit all of the concerns that we have, why are we in this House this time of night debating whether or not to hold a general election? Why isn't he in Brussels trying to get a deal? Why isn't he putting the interests of this country above his own political ambition? Let me be as clear as I can, Mr. Speaker. I desperately want a general election because the people of Knowsley deserve better than this squalid, mean and incompetent government. But to shut down Parliament for a general election at this critical point in our history would require us to trust that the Prime Minister would behave honourably. Mr. Speaker, I cannot take that on trust. I'll conclude, Mr. Speaker, with some words that the House will be familiar with, and those words are, "Cometh the hour, cometh the man." Well, Mr. Speaker, the hour has come, but certainly not the man.
Mr. Kevin Hollinrake.
Pleasure to be called in this debate and to follow the honourable gentleman for Knowsley. I have lost count of the number of times in my travels through the beautiful constituency of Thirsk and Malton when I've been approached by people saying, "What on earth are you lot doing down there? Why can't you simply just sort it out together?" But the reality is there are three reasons why we can't. Number one, of course, there are an awful lot of Remain MPs in this Parliament. And I speak as a Remain Member of Parliament. I voted to remain. If there was another referendum, I would vote to remain again. But I do not advocate a referendum. I've had my fill of referendums. I also voted in this place to give the people a vote to decide whether we stay or we leave. But nevertheless, if people are straightforward, when push comes to shove, there are a number of MPs in this place who do want a second referendum, whatever they might say. The second reason, of course, is party politics. And the Leader of the Opposition, of course, is the worst culprit for this. He claims now that to leave the European Union with a wrong deal would be catastrophic, despite the fact, for decades, he's campaigned to leave the European Union on any terms possible. And the reality is, of course, that when a deal came back before this House, a deal that was a fair deal in my view by the previous Prime Minister, 90% of the colleagues on this side of the House voted to pass that deal. Only 2% of members opposite voted for that deal. 5 members of Parliament. Too much party politics got in the way of a sensible deal. And the final point is, I think it is in terms of Brexit perfection, because there are 10% of the colleagues on this side of the House, for whatever reason, either the deal was too hot or too cold, we did not vote for that deal. It was not seen as the Goldilocks deal. Some people said it wasn't Brexit. Some people said, of course, that people voted for a completely clean break. But the reality is the Vote Leave campaign quite clearly said in their manifesto, when we leave the European Union, there is a European free trade zone that stretches from Iceland to the borders of Russia, and when we leave, we will be part of it. So it is quite reasonable that people would expect when we leave there would be a deal. And that's why the Prime Minister put her red lines, set out her red lines, and brought back the deal she did, which I think did respect the terms, the promises that were made prior to that referendum. So the question being then, to settle this issue, the members opposite are often asking for a people's vote. Surely now is the right time for a people's vote, because Happy to give away to my honourable friend.
As always, we're making a brilliant point. And the only sadness about proroguing is that we won't be having the Treasury Select Committee elections very soon, of course. Can I say, my friend, is it not confusing for the public that many of them are opening their doors and finding on their doormat a Labour leaflet that says on it, we want a general election and we want it now? Really? Isn't that confusing for the public?
Really?
And letters.
It is very confusing. And I too regret that we're not here on Wednesday to go through that final election process for the Treasury Select Committee. But nevertheless, surely now is the perfect time because, yes, the members opposite, if they're right, if the public doesn't want a deal or no deal, surely they'll vote in their favour. And they'll return a coalition government or a government that then can take their way forward. But if they also feel they do want to move down the track of deal or no deal, surely they'll vote for this side of the House for the Conservative policy of delivering Brexit on the 31st of October of this year. Surely now is the right time to trust the people to make that choice. Is it not simply political advantage that's getting in the way of that situation? Now there is an imperative now, by keeping that deadline, the 31st of October, two imperatives. One is getting the deal with the European Union, the fact that there is that deadline in time of the 31st of October, but also an imperative in this House. At that point in time, when that deal comes back, which I believe the Prime Minister can deliver, that deal comes back to this House, members across this House will have a choice, either to vote for a deal or to vote for no deal, and then surely they'll choose a deal and we leave on the 31st of October.
Phil Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, can I just say that I'm sorry to see you go up, because I know you've actually stood up for backbenchers in the last 10 years, and that you've been a great respecter of the Chamber, and it's just to wish you and your family all the best for the future. I don't intend to speak very long, but suffice to say that I actually agree with the Prime Minister. He uses the same language I do when he says, put it to the people. He's considered that the people should be engaged in a final say, so let them have the final say in a confirmatory ballot on the issue of Brexit in a people's vote. Mr. Speaker, it is wrong to conflate Brexit, which is a decision for a generation, with a general election campaign which is meant to decide a programme of government for a maximum of 5 years. I think the Prime Minister knows that. I'm not going to give way, I'm not going to speak for very long. But I also think he's been found out. It's about 8 weeks to October the 31st, but the Prime Minister wants us to take the next 4 or 5 weeks up with electioneering rather than going to look for a deal. So I have some words of advice for the Prime Minister. Go to Brussels and start negotiating. Bring back a deal you have promised this country, and put it to this House. I'll help facilitate its passage through Parliament as long as it's put back to the British people for them to decide whether they want to go ahead with it or stay within the EU in a confirmatory ballot. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has lost the father of the House, Winston Churchill's grandson, his own brother, and I understand in the last few days the Duke of Wellington has left the Conservative Party. The Prime Minister has actually met his Waterloo. But it's a Conservative Party now that can change its mind on no deal, but refuses to allow the British people to do the same on Brexit. It needs to have a final say on Brexit on the issue. And after 3.5 years, the will of the people on the generational decision of Brexit have the right to be asked again in the light of the fact this government is hell-bent on moving towards the EU exit door without a deal. The government will say it will be a betrayal of Brexit and of the British people if we do not deliver on Brexit. I'll tell you what is a betrayal of trust. It's leaving the EU without a deal and not telling the British people that it isn't a clean break. But like any Brexit deal, but even more so in the event of no deal, it will lead to years of uncertainty, economic wars for the majority of the people in this country, including unemployment. But of course, the main pursuers of Brexit are the ones who won't be losing the jobs. We need to resolve Brexit with the confirmation of the British people. That's how it began in 2016, and that's how it should be brought to a conclusion. The people have the right to compare the facts today with what was promised to them 3.5 years ago. Brexit started with the people, and it should end with the people. Prime Minister, resolve Brexit first, then let's have a general election. I won't be supporting the motion tonight.
Mr. William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the fundamental question which faces us today about whether or not we should have an early parliamentary election is really the same question that we've been debating now for many, many years, and particularly the last 3 years, in relation to the referendum result. And the question is, who governs this country? That is the key question. That is the issue which is before us tonight. And I have to say that with the greatest concern that the Labour Party, the opposition, have taken the view that they should run away from the very question that they know they will not be able to answer unless they win the general election. And they also know that they are not going to win that general election on all the present estimates. That is the real reason why they will not answer the question, who governs this country? That is the real reason why they will not, apparently, I assume tonight, vote in accordance with the answer to the question, who governs this country, to give us a general election. And the other point, of course, is that the Leader of the Opposition kept on saying that he would only allow a general election if the bill which is being given royal assent today was passed. And of course that bill has been passed, but ironically it still hasn't answered the question which I posed at the beginning about the law of the land and who governs this country, because there is nothing in this bill to actually repeal Section 1 of the Withdrawal Act itself, which says, as the law of the land, that October the 31st is exit day, as we speak in this debate, and that the Section 1 also says that the European Communities Act 1972 is repealed. And furthermore, the commencement order has already been made. There is nothing in that bill with which anybody can properly accuse the Prime Minister of not complying with the rule of law, because the rule of law is the 31st of October. That is the law of the land, and there is nothing in this bill that says otherwise. So very briefly, Mr. Speaker, I simply say this. This is a dereliction of duty by the party opposite. They are refusing to allow the British people to decide who governs this country, and they are running away from the fact that under the European Communities Act 1972 and the European Union, we are governed by majority vote by the other countries of the European Union, and that is the way in which they are themselves letting down the very people they represent. And in those Leave constituencies on the other side of the House, there are people who know very well what is happening, and they are not interested, increasingly according to the opinion polls, in supporting the Labour Party, because they are running away. They are running away from the one central question, who governs Britain, and the democracy that lies behind it. Give the people the freedom. Give the people the freedom to enable them to be able to decide instead of the rabble on the other side.
Ivan Lewis.
Mr. Speaker, in its handling of Brexit, this House has lost the respect of the country and made us a laughingstock around the world. Prolonged uncertainty, as much as no deal, can tip us into recession with disastrous consequences for jobs and for living standards. I hear high-minded speeches about protecting the Constitution and the propriety expected of government, and I accept there are a small number of members who are vehemently opposed to no deal, but would support Brexit with a fair deal. I also regret the fact that the government decided to prorogue this House, which was unnecessary as it was undesirable. But, Mr. Speaker, the vast majority on the opposition benches, when they claim support for an affirmative referendum, and/or opposition to no deal are determined to overturn the result of the referendum. They have displayed an increasing contempt for our duty as democrats to respect and implement the result. They lecture others about democracy, accountability and our national interest, yet they are hell-bent on frustrating the will of the majority of the people as expressed in that referendum. And Mr. Speaker, they should be honest. It is their objective to thwart Brexit in whatever the circumstances. Whatever the deal is put to this House, there are many, many people who will vote against it because they want to thwart the will of the people in terms of that referendum result. And it is many of the so-called progressives in this House who are fuelling right-wing extremism by showing contempt for the result, and the majority voted to leave. We asked the people and they gave us their decision to leave the European Union. I say that, Mr. Speaker, as a Remainer. One cannot be a selective Democrat who only respects democracy when it delivers your preferred result. And this goes to the root of the Leader of the Opposition's position tonight. He demands an election time and time again. But now, given the opportunity, he vetoes an election. Not because of the national interest or stopping no deal, but he knows he would lose that election. Not because of the vast majority of the values of decent Labour MPs and many Labour Party members, but because as a lifelong Eurosceptic, leading a party of Remainers, he's been caught out trying to have it both ways on Brexit time and time again. Because he does not have the leadership skills required at a time of so many challenges facing our country, and because his leadership has led to the party of anti-racism and equality becoming the party of institutionalised anti-Semitism. So much so, Mr. Speaker, that a majority of Jews in this country feel they would not be safe in the event of him becoming Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, this House cannot stand up for the public interest or break its stalemate for over 3 years. Therefore, the national interest demands a general election. Then maybe, Mr. Speaker, a new House will be able to show the leadership that this country needs and it deserves. And it deserves to begin the process of rebuilding trust in this place and healing the scars of division in our society. And I hear some of my honourable friends saying, what about a by-election? Because that's what the momentum types in my constituency keep saying. I'm running away from the electorate by not having a by-election now I'm an independent. I'm voting for a general election tonight. I'm willing to face the people in my constituency, unlike too many of the people on these benches. And finally, Mr. Speaker, there were many tributes paid today, quite rightly, Mr. Speaker, to the way you have presided over this House. And I would like to add to that the work that you did for children with speech and language difficulties, which changed the lives of many families. But when I heard the speeches earlier, and they talked about how proud they were of this House of Commons, they're not living in the real world. My voters, my constituents, are not proud of this House of Commons. They think we've entirely lost the plot, Mr. Speaker. So the time has come for people to be honest with the British people. And that honesty means that we need to respect the result of that referendum. Otherwise, the alternative will be to fuel right-wing populism like we've never seen in the history of this country.
Mr. Speaker, nobody can argue that tonight we are not facing an impasse that affects not just the question of our relationship with Europe, but the very constitution of our country. And so the question of a people's vote, sadly I find, is not an answer. Because this question is not just one question, it is every question. The only way to answer it is to ask the British people, Ask them, who do they want as their advocates in this House? Who do they want speaking for them, not just on one issue, but on every issue? The question, Mr. Speaker, is who will stand up for the British people, will call an election, and will ask them who governs Britain.
Mike Gapes, order. Order. I've never known a situation in which Mr. Gapes can't be heard. If there's some private spat taking place, it should take place outside of the chamber, not in it. Very unsatisfactory. Mr. Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, can I pay tribute to you and what you have done to stand up for representative parliamentary democracy against an arrogant and overbearing executive. I don't have long. I want to make 2 points. Firstly, there is an old adage, neither Washington nor Moscow. And I say neither Uxbridge nor Islington. Yes. In this time of national crisis, this country is in a very dangerous place. And it is time that all the moderate Social Democrats and One Nation Conservatives and Liberals came together to stop the extremism which is going to damage our country for decades to come. We have to stop this process. And the best way is to recognise a general election will not resolve it, as the member for Rutland made clear. What we have to do is put the issue back to the people. As the member, others have said, we need a people's vote, which is a choice, an informed choice. We should pause this process, stop the no-deal Brexit, defend the people in Ireland and in Gibraltar. And
the question is, thank you. The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. As many as I've heard opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. Division! Clear the lobby. The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. As many as I've heard opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Ian Stewart and Stuart Andrew. Tell us for the noes. Well, in shorthand, a break and a lake. Tom Brake and Ben Lake. Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 293. The noes to the left, 46.
That's less than last time.
Yeah.
For us, not for you.
The ayes to the right, 293. The noes to the left, 46. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it. However, I say by way of explanation, for those who observe our proceedings, and the nods suggest they're well ahead of me, which I would expect, the majority does not satisfy the requirements of the Fixed-Term Parliaments Act for the purpose of engendering the election that some seek. I am simply the messenger, and I've reported the facts, and I'm glad that the matter is of interest to those who are looking upstairs, and thank you very much indeed. Order. Point of order, the Prime Minister. Unlock. Point of order, the Prime Minister.
I earlier urged the House to trust the people, but once again the opposition think they know better. They want the British Prime Minister to go to a vital negotiation without the power to walk away. They want to delay Brexit yet again without further reference to those who voted for it, handing over to Brussels an extra £250 million a week for no purpose, enough to upgrade more than 5 hospitals or train 5,000 new nurses. And most egregiously of all, not only have they refused to choose the way ahead, they have now twice denied the British people their say in an election. The House cannot choose. It will not let anyone else choose, Mr. Speaker. It resolves only to be irresolute, decides only to be undecided, determined to dither adamant for drift. And so now the House will move to adjourn and resume the state opening and the Queen's speech on October the 14th. And I hope the opposition will use that time to reflect. Meanwhile, this government will press on with negotiating a deal. While preparing to leave without one. And I will go to that crucial summit in Brussels on October the 17th. And no matter how many devices this Parliament invents to tie my hands, I will strive, Mr. Speaker, to get an agreement in the national interest. This government will not delay Brexit any further. We will not allow the emphatic verdict of the referendum to be slowly suffocated by further calculated drift and paralysis. And while the opposition run from their duty to answer to those who put us here, they cannot hide forever. The moment will come when the people will finally get their chance to deliver their verdict, Mr. Speaker, on how faithfully this House executed their wishes. And I am determined that they will see that it was this government that was on their side.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I think we've had quite enough of the playground politics for the Conservative Party this evening. The one thing the Prime Minister didn't say was that he was going to obey the law of this country. He did not say he acknowledged or accepted 3 votes that have taken place in this Parliament. And under his request, the House is now due, apparently, this evening to be prorogued for one of the longest prorogations in history, simply in order to avoid any questioning of what he is doing or not doing, simply to avoid discussion about Yellowhammer, particularly to avoid any discussion about the proposals he has or hasn't or do or don't exist that have been put to the European Union. Mr. Speaker, this government is a disgrace, and the way the Prime Minister operates is a disgrace.
Be quiet. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I hope the Prime Minister will reflect on the issue of prorogation and shutting down Parliament to avoid a government being held to account, because that is exactly what he has done today and proposes to do to this country.
Point of order, Ian Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I should perhaps congratulate the Prime Minister, because at least he's been consistent. He's lost every vote he's brought to this House since he became Prime Minister. And perhaps that's the reason. Perhaps that's the reason, Mr. Speaker, that he's trying to shut down democracy this evening. The message that must go to the Prime Minister is, well, he can run for the next few weeks, but we'll be back here in the middle of October. He is the Prime Minister of a minority government, and he's been given an instruction that he's to go to Brussels and get an extension. Once that extension has been delivered, we will have an election and Boris will be swept from government. The people of Scotland will get their say, and I look forward to us securing our future as an independent Scottish government, away from the clutches of a Tory Brexit Britain, an isolationist Britain, taking us away from our partners and friends in the European Union.
Thank you. Sir Edward Davey, point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Point of order. This is a sad day, actually, for our democracy. We are seeing this Parliament shut down, Mr. Speaker, because the Prime Minister is running away from accountability, from scrutiny. A Prime Minister who said that he's not prepared to abide by the rule of law is running away from this Parliament. I offer the Prime Minister a way out. The Liberal Democrats offer the Prime Minister a way out. Put it to the people in a people's vote.
Yes, it's called a general election.
Thank you. Point of order, Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if you can advise me how I can put on record the views of my constituents. This evening, I was due to present a petition to this House, forthcoming from thousands of my constituents who wish Parliament not to be prorogued. Due to the procedures, the voices of my constituents will be silenced this evening and the petition will not be placed. Could you advise me on the actions that I can now take?
There are two actions that can be taken. One is to speak on the floor of the chamber, which is what the Honourable Lady has just done, and to that extent she's found her own salvation. And the second course of action open to the Honourable Lady is to deposit the petition in the bag. And I've got a feeling that, with a fleetness of foot that will be admired in all parts of the House, that is the action that the Honourable Lady will now take. It may be a second best so far as she is concerned, but as I say, she has found a means by which to give expression to the concerns of her constituents. Point of order, Liz Saville-Roberts.
34 days during which all the checks and balances and gears of parliamentary democracy have been deliberately stalled. When the government teeters between avoiding and evading the law, this is neither normal nor honourable. We desperately need a new politics of citizens' conventions in every nation, of truth and conciliation in an informed referendum. with Article 50 revoked, if necessary, to allow this to happen. Now, I know I can't ask you to resolve this, in all honesty, but I think the time is fast approaching when we'll have to do exactly that.
Thank you. Point of order, Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The events of tonight, I think, have shown so clearly that our political system is broken. It is wrong that a Prime Minister can suspend Parliament as a mere inconvenience simply to avoid scrutiny. It is wrong that he can cynically try to use the proposal for a general election as a way of getting us to crash out of the EU while we're in the middle of a general election campaign. We cannot continue with this uncodified constitution that depends on people playing by the rules when we have a feral government that not only is not playing by the rules but isn't even going to abide by the law. We urgently need a written constitution, a citizens' convention to inform it. No one voted for less democracy. We should design our constitutional settlement so that such a cynical power grab can never be allowed to happen again.
Thank you. Point of order, Luke Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I seek your guidance because I think many of our constituents will be confused tonight. They will be confused because a Labour Party that has asked for a general election for 2 years turned it down. A Liberal Democratic Party that is acting anything but democratic. And an SNP party that is so arrogant it says it speaks for all of Scotland when no one party speaks for all of Scotland. Tonight we put a lot of people in this house have put our faith. You say about shouting people down, but you're happy to shout me down. I think not. Mr. Speaker, when we come back, a lot of people have put faith in my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, to come back with a new deal. There are concerns about time. In the time that you have left, Mr. Speaker, can you assure the House that additional time will be made for debate when we come back? If that means late-night sittings, if that means weekend sittings, we shall have it, because we need to debate a new rule, and hopefully you will help facilitate that.
I will come to the right honourable gentleman. The House is in charge of its own procedures. I note the opinion that the honourable gentleman holds. It will be shared by many of his colleagues, I'm sure, but not by others. And as I say, the House is in command of its own procedures. We don't have executive control of the House. The House can do as it wishes in these matters, and his opinion on this subject will have been heard. Point of order, Mr. Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm not served in this House for as long as you. But I do recall around a decade ago that the Lisbon Treaty was rammed through this House without a referendum. That caused such ill feeling among the people of the United Kingdom that in a way that no one could have predicted at the time, within 7 years, the people of this country voted to leave the European Union. My point is that the people who rammed the treaty through at the time thought they were being very clever. History proved them wrong. The people on the other side of the House who think they have been very clever tonight by resisting a general election cannot hide forever from the judgment of the people. They should ask not for whom the bell tolls, because eventually, Mr. Speaker, it tolls for them.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman. Point of order, Brendan O'Hara.
On a
point of order. Could you advise me how I registered my anger and deep frustration at the outrageous and profoundly undemocratic suspension of this Parliament this evening? With barely 7 weeks before the UK is due to leave the European Union, my Argyll and Bute constituents are deeply worried, understandably so, that this government, as the right honourable member for Hastings and Rye said at the weekend, have no interest in securing a deal, and rather they are hell-bent on pursuing a catastrophic policy of no deal. Along with every other part of Scotland, my Argyll and Bute constituency voted overwhelmingly to remain, and will have profound and devastating effects on our tourism, our farming and our fishing industries. Mr. Speaker, surely the least that my Argyll and Bute constituents could expect is that the Member of Parliament is able to represent them in this chamber at this most critical moment.
Fantastic. Thank you. The honourable gentleman began his attempted point of order by inquiring how he could register his anger. He has, of course, now done so. It's on the record. It will be reproduced in the official report, and something tells me that his observations in the official report will shortly be winging their way towards the local media in the honourable gentleman's constituency. If there are no further points of order... Oh, very well. Point of order, Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU. And what they have...
62%.
And I seek your guidance, Mr. Speaker, because tonight, not only have they been ignored, their views have been dismissed with utter contempt. And I ask you, Mr. Speaker, what outlet the people of Scotland can have until they have... so that they can express their view about their constitutional future as being part of this moribund, and corrupt union that has been exemplified tonight.
The time when the honourable lady's constituents and more widely the electorate of Scotland might be in a position to register their views in the way she suggests could well be not long from now. No set of points of order would be complete without the product of the lucubrations of the honourable gentleman. Point of order, Mr. Martin Doherty-Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if you could advise me on process for what is supposed to be the Mother of Parliament. Non-sober members opposite should maybe wished a wee bit. What I would ask, Mr. Speaker, in terms of especially those who can't hot their drink, Mr. Speaker, is if the government does not meet the obligations of a vote of the House in the next few weeks, what is open not only to members who have overwhelmingly rejected the government's position, not only in terms of a general election at this time, but more importantly of implementing the majority of members' decisions in terms of a no-deal Brexit, what is open to you as the chair of this House to assure not only myself but my constituents that a government which does not listen to the so-called sovereign parliament is therefore undermining fundamental... The honourable member should maybe wish a wee minute. I've told him once, I'll not tell him again. The fact that he's not even be able to take a chair and is sitting in the flare says more about him than any other member in this House. If the government will not implement the law of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Ask Sasha about it.
What is open to you, Mr. Speaker, and the House to make sure that they do?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. At this stage, it's a hypothetical question because one would need to look at the specifics. But what I would say to the honourable gentleman is that if there is a dispute as to what a law means or what compliance with it looks like. That is ultimately justiciable, and therefore it is to be expected that it would be the subject of a court ruling. These are not uncommon matters, though it would be a very high-profile situation in the circumstances with which we're dealing. But it does seem to me that members should reflect upon these matters and think about their options and the attitude of their colleagues in the cool light of day. That is not necessarily best achieved by a furious focus at 12:51 in the morning. And point of order, Kirsty Blackman.
Speaker, during the course of this process, the European Statutory Instruments Sifting Committee was set up in order to sift those statutory instruments that were required in the event of a Brexit happening. In advance of the 29th of March, the government brought forward a number of these no-deal SIs in order that they said that the UK would be prepared for a no-deal Brexit. The European Statutory Instruments Sifting Committee has sifted 240 of these statutory instruments that have come forward to it as negative instruments. There have been 580 in total. I've discovered today, Mr Speaker, that the government intends to bring forward 10 of these statutory instruments as made affirmative statutory instruments in order to ensure that we are prepared for a no-deal exit. Mr Speaker, I'm a bit confused as to why the government did not bring these forward in advance of the 29th of March, if no-deal Brexit was supposed to happen on that date, or the second date that no-deal Brexit was supposed to happen, or in fact at any time before this prorogation happened, so that the EU Statutory Instruments Sifting Committee could sift them as appropriate, and so the House would have the opportunity to have its say on whether or not these were appropriate statutory instruments to go through. Is there any recourse that we can have, given that prorogation is about to happen, and these instruments will be made without the say-so of the House?
I'm not privy to the government's thoughts on these matters. It would be perfectly open for a member of the executive branch to respond to the honourable lady if he or she so wished, but I don't detect a notable enthusiasm. I'm not aware, looking at him now and his body language, that the Leader of the House is about to uncoil. And if he were to do so, doubtless he would give a response. But he's not doing so. So although it is a matter of very considerable importance to the honourable lady, it's not something in relation to which I can offer her help now. I suggest that she takes it up in view of the important position in her party she holds with the Leader of the House, whom I've always found, I must say, in every dealing, a most courteous and agreeable individual. And I'm sure that he would be more than content to discuss this matter with her, either over a cup of English breakfast tea or conceivably something stronger. Here we go. Point of order, Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite said that he would vote for a general election tonight if royal assent was passed. But today he said that he will not because he wants to prevent no deal. Can you confirm, Mr. Speaker, that actually, if an election had been held on the 15th of October, there would have been plenty of time, had the Right Honourable Gentleman won the election, to have prevented no deal? And in actual fact, there must be another reason for him running scared.
Confirm anything of the sort. The expression "plenty of time," is an evaluative statement. It is obviously a view that she holds, and she's entitled to it. But I certainly can't confirm anything of the sort. I think essentially the honourable lady is accusing the Leader of the Opposition of tergiversation. I mean, it's not a new charge. Tergiversation. Yes, it's not a new charge. It's a charge that's been levelled many times over the centuries. No, I don't need anything further. No, nothing further required. That's the charge. No. That's the charge she's levelling. But it's not a fatal charge. It's not a fatal charge. And it has to be said. Not only is it not a fatal charge, it's not a novel concept or without precedent in the history of our politics. And we'll leave it there. Point of order, Stephen Gethins.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has previously intimated that there may be a number of solutions and new negotiations ahead of the next European Council.
Now, members on his own side might say that he's being disingenuous. No. If we are prorogued, what opportunity does this House have to consider them before the next European Council?
The House is scheduled to return on the 14th of October, and the honourable gentleman knows for what purpose we will resume, for the gracious address and the opening of the new session. But the House and its members are legendarily ingenious in ensuring that that which they wish to be attended to in the House is attended to in the House. Order. Order. The sitting is suspended until 1:10. Shortly before the sitting resumes, I shall cause the division bells to be sounded. Order. Order.